As the mayor of the town of Clayton, I'd like to call this regular town council meeting to order. Ask you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let us pray. Most gracious and heavenly Father, we pause to give you thanks for all of the many blessings of today, and we ask, Lord, now that you be with us as we proceed with the business for the town of Clayton. For it is in your great name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Do we have any adjustments to the agenda?
We do have two adjustments, Mayor. The first is under 5 introductions and special presentations. We'd like to excuse Ms. Sharon Sharpe, who had a family emergency arise and cannot be with us for her introduction tonight. And secondly, we would like to add an item of going into closed session for attorney-client privilege, dealing with existing litigation related to the Shenandoah Holmes case.
All right, I got that noted on my agenda. Up next is your consent agenda.
Move we approve. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Next, we'll have new employee introductions.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council, Blair, Myhand, Police Chief. I'm very excited to finally get to present Miss Lara Keating-Lopez to you as an official employee for the town and for the police department. So several months ago, we had an occasion where we needed to hire a temporary worker for our front office. And Lara came recommended by Meredith Mumford, and so we interviewed her and she was hired, and we've had her on for a couple months towards the end of 2019 as a temporary worker. And then early this year, I was very pleased to be able to offer her a job. And so Lara's got about 20 years of customer service. She says she started when she was like 4 or 5. That's why she has so many years. She comes from beautiful Beaufort, South Carolina. I wasn't sure if it was Beaufort. I thought it was Beaufort, but she corrected me. She lives here locally, and she is by far one of the most pleasant people and positive people that you will meet working anywhere. So we're very fortunate to have her and excited for what she's going to provide for us. So Lara, would you?
Thank you, Chief. I'm very blessed for this opportunity to work with the town of Clayton. I've been a resident for over 20 years, and to be a part of this is, I can't even put into words, and it's just been a great honor, and I look forward to many, many years with the town of Clayton, and thank you for the opportunity very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Michael Tutwiler, GIS coordinator here at the town, and I'm pleased to introduce you tonight to Ben Painter, who is our new GIS technician. Ben has previous work experience as a GIS technician at the town of Apex and the Orange County Water and Sewer Authority, and recently completed a master's degree in planning from the University of Chapel Hill.
Council, I'm looking forward to serving the town of Clayton. Already been hitting the ground running, making maps for folks, and looking forward to making tools that help the town function better. So thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. Welcome.
Congratulations.
All right. Up next on the agenda is the audit presentation.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council, Robert McKie, Finance Director. This year we're going to do something a little different than what we've done in prior years. I'm going to kind of go over and give council a review of the audit process itself to try to give you added awareness and better understanding. and then we'll drill down into the results for the year in conjunction with our policy benchmarks. So in the past, the auditor's been here and kind of did his little audit presentation before I did, but we're giving another shot at doing something a little different. And hopefully that'll be, the council will find that beneficial. So I'd like to start off with first, okay. We talk about the audit report, we talk about the CAFR, and sometimes we may think of those as interchangeable, but there actually is a difference. So the CAFR, or the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, actually contains all the elements that's in the audit report that's filed with Local Government Commission. But what sets the CAFR apart which is the award program that's offered by the Government Finance Officers Association, it requires information above and beyond. And so in the CAFR, you have an introductory section, which is highlighted here on the screen. And within that introductory section, you got those various areas that we have to provide information for. So that's not part of the audit report. And is also, all right, this is not. Also in the CAFR, there's a statistical section, which is rather comprehensive. And that statistical section has quite a bit of data in it, financial data, revenue capacity, debt, as well as operating data. And that's basically, most of that information back there is a 10-year history of various data. So that is basically the two biggest differences between the CAFR and the audit report. So when you think of the audit report, it's different than the CAFR. Okay. Where are we going here? It's not advancing.
Not advancing.
No. All right.
See if it will advance.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So we start out with a review of the audit process. And what's important here is that in the world of local and state governments, you have GASB, or the Government Accounting Standing Boards, and that's the primary source for generally accepted accounting principles in local government. And then from an auditing perspective, you have what's called the Yellow Book, which is generally accepted auditing standards. And that's published by the U.S. Government Accountability Office. And then you get into these oversight bodies. You have the Local Government Commission here in North Carolina. GS 15934 is the statute that actually requires all local governments and counties to file an audit report in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. You have the Office of State Auditor, which is an oversight agency. And in regards to the last two, in regards to the external auditors, you have the AICPA as well as the North Carolina Association of CPAs. And those last two agencies, they coordinate the peer review for all the external auditors. So periodically, every external auditor of a state and local government undergoes a peer review. And it's in conjunction with those two agencies. And that feedback on that peer review is given back to the Local Government Commission. So if there's a negative on a peer review, the Local Government Commission is aware of it. So everything's feeding back to Local Government Commission. And sometimes, based upon those peer reviews in the Local Government Commission oversight, they may kind of blacklist an audit firm from being able to do audits in the local government world. So also you have procedures that auditors have to do to comply with the Local Government Budget and Fiscal Control Act. And you can see there's some of those procedures there. All right, it's not flipping. Okay, there it just did. And the state treasurer has an audit manual for local governments, and in that audit manual, there's a municipal checklist. But what's more common is the PPC's guide to audits of local governments. And Stacy's going to bring that up here. But the PPC guide, this is the work paper index. And within each one of those major topics, there's a separate checklist underneath each one of those. I didn't want to get too down the weeds with the checklist, but there's 70 things there, items on that index, and each one of those things has a comprehensive checklist that the auditor has to actually go through to complete his audit process. So you can see, in terms of the local government audits, it's very comprehensive. There's a lot of work that's required, and there's a guideline that they go through to complete so they can make sure that they've done all the audit work that needs to be done. So it's a very comprehensive process. And nowadays, there's not as many firms as there were in the past that are willing to do local and state governmental audits. Another thing to point out here is it's town management's responsibility for the preparation and fair presentation of financial statements. It's not the auditor's responsibility. It's the town's responsibility, management. Some auditors in the past have prepared financial statements, maybe even done some records. Years ago, our auditor used to prepare our financial statements. That hasn't been the case for probably 4 or 5 years now. But the GOA and their Yellow Book revisions put greater pressure on auditors being able to do financial statement preparation. It interferes with the independence requirements. So what you're going to have in the local government world is you're going to find if towns that are using auditors prepare the financial statements, they're going to have to probably hire another firm to do their financial statements. The auditor is not going to be able to do that because of the independence rule. And as you can see there, non-audit services include preparation of accounting records and financial services. So that's separate from the audit itself. All right. And another thing in the audit is when the auditor is looking at the town system of internal controls, he's looking at it from perspective of, does our controls provide regional assurance that our financial statements are free from material weaknesses, whether that be due to fraud or error? So it's not a bulletproof thing. He's looking for reasonable assurance that there's no material misstatements. Yeah, go ahead. All right. So this next slide is a timeline of kind of the audit process. So as you can see there, we start out with collaboration with the auditor on the left-hand side, and that basically goes on all year. I'm communicating and interacting with the auditor over the course of the entire year. The next step is the audit contract. In the spring, April, May timeframe, we're approving and executing the audit contract for the subsequent fiscal year, for that current fiscal year, I should say. And then in June, the auditor comes on site and he does his preliminary field work. And when he does the preliminary field work in June, he's taking a sampling of inventory, as well as he's doing fixed asset verification, meaning whatever vehicles we bought in the year, any type of expensive equipment, if we build a new building, anything like that, he's going through and verifying that. That's what's going on towards the latter part of June. And then when we go through the period of July through September, I'm actually preparing the audit workbook. And all that audit workbook, we're doing all the reconciliations for all the cash, accounts receivable, payroll, fixed assets, everything. It's a pretty tedious process. And simultaneously during that time frame, he's gone through and starting his PPC audit guide that I showed you, that index. He's going through and he's starting to do his checklist for those items. And then we get in September, when he comes back on site in September, I'm going through and I'm preparing the financial statements, the notes, the required supplemental entry information, and giving him the information that he needs if he's got to do any single audits. And then, of course, in October, that's a carryover with the LGC filing is due at the end of October. By the 31st, you have to file your audit report. And then once the audit report is filed, we wait for the LGC to come back and tell us they've approved our audit report. And once that occurs, immediately I'll start, it's usually November, December timeframe, I start compiling the CAFR, which means I'm primarily focused on those other two sections I showed you, the introductory section and all the statistical information. So that kind of gives you a snapshot of the timeline of the audit process over the course of the year. Okay. All right, so now we're going to get into the financial results highlights. So the general fund, as you know, is the chief operating fund of the town. Our unassigned fund balance was roughly $7.6 million at the end of 2019, June 30th. Our total fund balance increased $2.7 million up to 14.4. Some of the major reasons for the increase in fund balance compared to the previous year is our ad valorem tax revenue increase. That's primarily due to our 3-cent tax rate increase. We had higher sales tax revenues, permits and fees revenues, had a substantial increase in our investment income, and we also had increases in our operating expenses compared to the previous year, and that was due to capital outlay in streets, buying rolling stock, and also some personnel costs in public safety, PD, fire. If you want a budget comparison, you can refer to your Exhibit A1 in the CAFR. That'll show you the results of actual results compared to budget. Next slide. Okay. Then we're going to move on to the proprietary funds, our water, sewer, and electric fund. So the overall net position for the proprietary funds increased about $4.3 million. Water, sewer was $3 million, electric was $1.2. Some of the reasons, big reasons for that is our expenses net of program revenues decreased about 1.7. Both water and sewer funds had increases in their operational revenues compared to the prior year. The water sewer fund had some additional grant revenues, primarily related to the ECIA lift station project. And then we also had some increases in expenses that were attributable to capacity allocation purchases to support future demand related to our industrial growth, and also higher wholesale power purchases. You can flip it. All right, now we're going to go in and we're going to show some of our growth rate. As you can see, it's a 5-year history. Our sales tax revenues have averaged 9% increase for the 5-year period, which is pretty remarkable, really strong. Our property tax revenue, we've averaged a 5-year growth rate of 6.4%. You can see it by year there. So our property values are growing. We had of course, this fiscal year we're in now is a reval year, so we're probably even going to see greater growth when we get into 2020 fiscal year. But still a nice, healthy growth. Our assessed value, our 5-year average is 4.1% on our assessed value, and that's going to rise in 2020 as well due to the reval. Here we're going to get into our fund balance ratio. Our unassigned fund balance as a percentage of net expenditures is 32% compared to our policy and expectations, so we're well above that. Our debt ratios, general fund, we're at our debt service ratio is 8.1% compared to a policy of 15. Our debt as a percentage of assessed value is 0.65%, which is well below the 2.5% policy. Our 10-year payout ratio continues to improve, primarily because we haven't taken on any new debt in the general fund. That's at 82.6%, where our policy is 55%. Now we're going to get into our enterprise funds. The debt coverage ratio on our water sewer fund was 3.62 compared to our policy and expectations there, 1.25, 1.5. Our electric fund, our coverage ratio was 2.36 with the same policy and benchmark expectations. You can flip it. Operating days cash on hand. So as you can see here, the water sewer fund, we had a little blip here in 2019. And that's primarily attributable to, we had capacity purchases that we made of $5.5 million. And so that's a draw on cash as well as increase in operating expenses. And that ratio looks at your cash divided by operating expenses by 365. So if you remove that, we're well within our policy. We're at 274 if you remove the impact of those purchases. But the true calculation is 64.21 versus 182.5. But that's the reasons. There was a kind of a one-off anomaly that we did. We made those larger capacity purchases. The electric fund really didn't have any anomalies like that, so we were at 127.1 versus 91.25 days. So you can flip it. Yeah. Next one. Oh, there should be.
Should be another one?
Yeah. Well, I think it was. Probably this, okay. I think the last slide was just questions, if you had any questions, so, yeah, there it is right there, okay. So here's the audit report highlights. This is the audit report that the auditor did was enclosed in your package. And the things that I covered were on there. These highlights are what I haven't covered at this point. So it's important, like all the other years, we received an unmodified, clean opinion. Audit report was submitted and approved by the LGC. The town had no compliance violations. That means in terms of budgetary or with our single audits related to any of our capital project funds. We have a very strong tax collection percentage, almost 100%. As you can see, our general fund, our debt decreased $1.3 million. That's primarily attributable to we didn't take on any new debt, so it's just these amortization of our existing debt. And the same thing was applicable to our proprietary funds. Our debt declined $1.2 million. Same thing, we didn't add any new debt. It's just, we're just declining based upon our amortization of our existing debt. So with that, I'll wrap it up, and if you've got any council has any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Questions or comments? Mr. Granis?
First of all, thank you for this. I would say that we're looking pretty good. And I know that's attributed to you and your team and that gentleman down there and his team. On page 38 of our agenda, the year-end June 30, 2019 general fund was $8,581,406. The year before, it was higher. And I'm just curious as to what you attribute that difference of $662,000.
What page are you looking at?
Well, I'm on the agenda page number 38, which is the available fund balance, tax collection percentage, and other audit information. Fund balance information as follows. Page 38.
Let's see.
There you go. So the first column on the left.
Yeah, this is the auditor's report, and what he's reporting on there is available fund balance. And we really don't focus on that. Our policy is unassigned fund balance, and those are two different things. Available fund balance is an animal, for lack of a better word, that only exists in North Carolina. And it's the definition that the LGC has defined. And I typically don't reference that number because in our policies, we report on our unassigned fund balance. Showing there is the first column, the 8.5 number, or 8.6 really, that is the available fund balance. And the number next to it is the total general fund balance. So the 14,455,313 is the total fund balance for the general fund. And then the next two columns, those are that's the net position for the enterprise funds, water, sewer fund, electric fund. So if you were to look in the CAFR, which is where you should have pulled those numbers from, if you looked at Exhibit 8 in the CAFR, which is page 23 in the CAFR, you would see the ending net position for the water sewer fund is the 48,405, and the electric fund is the 14,271. And conversely, if you look at Exhibit 3 in the CAFR, you would see the numbers that were up there, the 14,455,315 for the general fund. That's the total fund balance. Pardon?
What page is that?
On page 18, Exhibit 3.
Okay.
So you'll see total fund balance was 14,455. So that very first number in that column was what was fund balance available, and we really don't make references to that in our performance. We're really more focused on the unassigned fund balance. But he includes that in his audit report because that was like an old LGC calculation that they did, but we really don't get into that. It has no bearing to us in terms of what we're doing, whatever. But did I answer your question?
Robert, perhaps you could just explain the difference between the two. Why is there a difference?
Okay, so unassigned fund balance is basically what is left over with all, when you come up with a total fund balance and you got to assign categories. You got to assign if there's any restricted, committed, assigned, what's left over is unassigned. So unassigned is really what we have to work with. And we amended our financial policy several years back to replace it with fund balance available with unassigned fund balance. And we did that to align with the new fund balance changes that the GFOA came out with, GASB came out with. They reclassified fund balance reporting. So we mirrored our policies to match that fund balance assignment. Fund balance available is essentially your assets less your liabilities, in essence. That's the LGC calculation. But that doesn't really tell you really what you have to work with, what's available to be appropriated, that you don't have restrictions on, it's not committed, and you haven't made some preliminary assignments.
So the other question I had related to your slide for operating days cash on hand for the enterprise funds. More specifically, the water and sewer. You addressed the reason for the dramatic reduction, which was because of the capacity that we purchased.
Yeah, we had a $5.5 million expense to reserve future water and sewer capacity. Predominantly was water capacity. We spent a little over $5 million to reserve 1,150,000 gallons per day from Johnston County.
Okay.
It's actually a cash outflow and an expenditure, and it directly affects that ratio.
Okay.
I said if you remove that out of the equation, pretend it didn't happen, our number would be 274.9.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's kind of a one-time, anomaly for 2019. It's not something that we're looking at, continuing on. But that's part of why we got the water sewer rate model to make sure that we're going to maintain our cash policies and different reserves and whatnot, and tracking that.
That's all I had.
Questions for anyone else? All right, Robert, thank you so much.
Okay.
Up next is a public hearing. It's the fiscal year 2021 public hearing input.
So in North Carolina, every local government must adopt an annual budget. And our cycle runs from July 1st through June 30th. And governments in North Carolina have to have a balanced budget, which means that our expenditures and revenues have to match. We can't overspend, in other words, what we think our revenues are going to be. Preparing a budget is a many months process. And statutorily, a local government is required to have a public hearing at some point about that budget. In the town of Clayton, we have opted to actually hold 2 public hearings, this being the first. One, to begin the process, to gather any input from the community that they might have at this formal setting. And then we will also hold a second formal public hearing at the end near the adoption of the budget. The logic being that, on the one hand, if you don't get input from the beginning, at the end, it may be too late. And so we want to get input on the front end, but not just waiting until then, because we want to hear on the back end too. So, of course, staff is always available for any public response or thoughts about the budget, but we want to at least have these 2 public hearings in a formal setting if people so choose to get up and address the council in this formal manner. Our schedule is really beginning now, where we've already kicked off discussing budget at the staff level. We're gathering input from them as they begin and prepare their budgets. We'll be holding a council retreat at the end of February, at which time we'll get further direction from council as we really dive deeper into the budget requests. Then we'll hold several meetings with department heads as we work through their requests, and ultimately we'll have a manager's recommended budget meeting with the council, at which time I will present a balanced budget with options for the council on how they want to proceed with either adopting that budget or make changes to that budget. All with the intent of having an adopted budget for this community sometime in May or perhaps early June, but certainly not later than July, which is statutorily we have to have it done by then. So that's my overview of the budget process, and would welcome any community input on thoughts they might have on the budget this year.
All right, so this has been noted as a public hearing, and I'll now open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak, please step forward and state your name for the record.
Good evening. My name is Joanne McKinnon. I'm a resident of Wullenwaber Subdivision, and thank you for allowing me to speak. In regards to the budget, because that's news to me, I am new to this process, so forgive me for subtle mistakes. In regards to the budget, Mr. Lindsay, are you speaking specifically of allocation of funds? Do we have a right to speak on that, of what should be allocated, or are you simply speaking of the balancing of the budget?
Well, you have a right to speak on anything you want.
Okay, yes, sir.
But the reality is we look at expenses and revenues the same in the budget
Okay,
process.
all right. And once again, I am new. So one of the things that I wanted to address, and I want to thank Ms. Moffitt for inviting me to speak before the council. This is an ongoing situation in the town of Clayton. I purchased a home in Wullenwaber Subdivision in 2014, and there is new construction going on in that subdivision, which is considered as progress, and I consider it as progress also as long as people are a part of the process. And one of the issues that I have with what's going on in Wullenwaber is simply this. There is a matter of congestion in regards to the budget. Going back to that, I would think that you all would want to allocate funds for, if you are going to develop a subdivision, you should have more than one point of egress and entry. And with Wullenwaber Subdivision, I do believe it's over 50 years old. I think that the original plat was considered back in 1965. And then, you know, the town was not as big as it's becoming. It's a beautiful town, and I do understand that we do have to develop and you do have to move forward and progress. And being able to progress means creating new homes, new jobs, et cetera. But in Wullenwaber, the beginning of the subdivision, the developers, and I won't name them because they know who they are, and I'm not here to try to shame anyone, I think that there should be a better plan of action in order to allow residents to be able to leave outside of the subdivision and to come in. To my point, I believe it was on Monday, I was coming into the subdivision, and there was a huge construction truck parked haphazardly in the middle of the road, and there were no flags. And there consistently are no flags in this area that they're developing. And I would just say to you all that if there are other developers that are coming in here to develop land, that you really take those things into consideration, the minute things that may not be considered. I sat in your meeting, I believe it was the first one of the year, in which other developers who are now developing over on 42 were speaking of traffic patterns. And to my dismay, the traffic patterns that were being spoken of were only being spoken of in a subjective manner. And the reason why I say subjective is because they use their guide to provide you the information based upon what they extrapolate the patterns to be. And I think that you need to have an objective opinion, or not necessarily an opinion, but an objective survey, so that you can take information from what these developers are providing y'all with, and also being able to have someone who represents the people, the town of Clayton, and being able to say, we need to come together to make sure that these patterns that we speak of regarding traffic are actually what they project them to be. And once again, my phone is on empty now. I had a whole agenda, so I'll try to remember from the top of what I wanted to really say. In regards to my being a resident here, once again, I want to underscore the fact that I love Clayton and I love living here. I'm a daughter from Florida, but I moved here, and I just think it's the perfect place to be. But in my being here, I also understand this regarding just the manner in which they solicited for Rollingwood subdivision, the change and the development. There was only a small placard. And I have taken off of work. I work from home, but I am not a salaried employee. I'm hourly, and in fact, I'm going to receive an occurrence because this was an unscheduled absence for me this evening. And I think that the reason why you might find a lot of people don't come to some of the town council meetings is because, like me, they have a schedule that does not permit them to be able to come and voice their opinion. In the subdivision that I reside in, most of my residents or most of my neighbors are retired individuals. So a lot of them are, from what I can gather, homebound. A lot of them are not able to make this meeting simply because of they're older individuals. And I would want you to understand that and let it be known that it's not apathy in regards to people not showing up. It may just simply be a matter of scheduling or physically not being able to make that. Now, with that being said, going back to the budget itself, I do hope that you do consider when y'all are saying your ayes regarding developing different subdivisions, that you do take into consideration that there needs to be more than one point of egress and entry. It's very important that a subdivision doesn't have one entryway. And I think that also in the matter of developers presenting this information, any new development should have a point in which they can come in and also a point in which they can leave. But for those people like myself, and the fact that they are now developing Rollingwood even more so, there should have been at least a new way to exit. And I think that that would have been very important to install before the initial process of them starting this new construction at the mouth of the subdivision, which in itself I have an issue with. And I can only surmise that there's going to be a very heavy level of congestion coming in and out of the subdivision. So I would hope that y'all would understand that and consider that in the next proposals for new development. With that being said, going back to the budget, and I'll try to keep it really concise and short, Going back to the budget in regards to just the town of Clayton utilities, I do understand that you receive your electricity from Duke, and that you garner that electricity from Duke, and with the water itself, you all charge people 1 to 3% if they are paying online. Since we are in the digital age, I ask you to do this, to consider possibly creating an app where residents can just easily pay their bills without the benefit of a third party charging an additional fee in order for them to pay their utility bill. I think that that's very appropriate. Duke has an app where you can go on Duke and you can pay your bills. So why can't Town of Clayton do that as well? And I think that that's something that you may want to do in regards to allocating funds for that. I think that that will eliminate the additional monies that has to be spent to pay a third-party vendor to manage your finances, essentially. Thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you. Questions or comments? All right, is there anyone else who would like to speak on budget? If so, please step forward. All right, no one wishing to speak, we'll close the public hearing and we'll turn it over to council for comments. Questions or comments?
I have one question
Yes.
to the lady. Your reference to financial paying, I assume you're talking about credit card? Yes, sir. Okay.
I know that there's an opportunity to write a check, but there are a lot of us that don't use checks anymore. And it would be, it's just an idea I thought, because as I was driving over here, I was wondering how could we remedy that situation of the third-party vendor? And the best idea would be for a secure app in which a person can just go online, take a look at their bill, manage it, and pay for it without an additional fee.
Our customer service director a couple of years ago proposed that we do that, but it would be an across-the-board charge to everybody that was a resident in the town of Clayton to our present charges, and I was not in favor of that. Now, I handle my utilities electronically through my bank. I do not use a credit card. That's one option people have.
Thank you.
And I would just add to that, the fee itself is coming from the credit cards.
Can you turn his volume up? Because I can't even hear him from here. I'm sorry, Adam.
I'll get as close as I can here. All right. So the fee itself is coming from the credit cards. And the debate that happens occasionally with the council is, do you pass those fees along to all customers, meaning just build it in so that, when you go to the store right now and you pay with your credit card, there's not an extra charge, although that store is paying an extra charge, so they build that into the price of the product. Or do you see the customer pay that charge based on their actual bill? That's the way that the town is currently doing it. But that's certainly something that the council does consider from time to time, is do you want to build that fee into everyone's charge, or do you reserve it? But to Mr. Holder's point, other ways to pay, including bank draft, has no additional fee. So if that is an option, we know it's not for everyone, you can have automatic draft taken, and there is no additional charge for those that opt that route.
Yes.
And Miss Ann Game is sitting right there. She'll wave, and if you want to know how to do any of those things, she'll be more than happy to tell you.
And I would just like to thank you for coming this evening and sharing your perspective. We've had several calls about what's kind of going on with the development around Wullenwaber, and whoever it is that we're contracting with, I'm sure they're going to have some awareness created on how to be a better neighbor. One, I would be totally frustrated if I had to wait for a big truck to get out of my way, because I'm just impatient. But I think the bigger point is the whole public safety concept, and that large vehicle doesn't need to be parked in that road for any length of time, because I want to make sure my fire trucks and my rescue vehicles have access. So we will continue to make sure that they realize they need to be a conscious and present and better neighbor.
Absolutely. And Mayor, just to expound upon your point,
I'm going to have to get you back to the microphone because we're recording.
apologize.
No, you're good.
Thank you, ma'am.
But Just to expound upon that point in regards to not just Rollingwood, I'm speaking of any subdivision where you have people who are coming in, who are changing the landscape, whatever the case may be. I think it's very important in regards to public safety, having proper flags out there, and they don't. I'm sorry to say that, but I've observed it enough that they don't have proper flagging out there. But I think it's very important because, you know, you want to prevent a collision from happening, but also just in terms of putting your finger on the pulse of what's going on and asking the residents, hey, how's it going? Even if that's for the developers, a responsibility to do and to put flyers out and ask, how are we doing, and submitting that. I think it's very important to know along the way, not just to approve an abatement or for an addition to be added on to a subdivision, but also to know how are things going along the way.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, anyone else? All right, if not, we'll move right along. The next item on your agenda is the 2019-243 OA Code of Ordinance Amendment, Unified Development Ordinance.
Good evening, Samantha Wullenwaber, Planning Director. I am a little under the weather, so forgive me. Let me know if you can't hear me, or because I sound weird, but if you can't hear me, let me know. I'll try to yell. Oh, there it goes. Good evening. This ordinance amendment is for the Section of our Code, Chapter 400, which is our General Development Standards. And the request is to amend the ordinance to clarify the phrases, General Development Standards for residential and non-residential development. And also at your seat, you should have had a corrected version of the ordinance amendment that was passed by Planning Board. At the Planning Board, there was discussion, and we removed the separation requirement between the access points that is stated in Appendix D. So what is online is not the version that is before you tonight, but it is the correct version, excuse me, that the Planning Board saw and then they voted on. So the first change is that any subdivision, excuse me, I have to get my water. With greater than 30 lots, you would have to have 2 access points. Previously, one of those could be stubbed out, but now we are proposing that these are fully constructed access points. And this does align with the fire code requirements. And then this is also the same for 75 lots. As you can see, there used to be a 75 lot requirement, but we've removed that because anything over 30 to 250 has to have 2 access points. And anything at 250 lots would have to have 3 access points fully constructed. This previously was, one may not be immediately constructed, but it may be stubbed out. As you can see under the item number B, in the residential subdivisions of 250 or more lots, a variance may be sought in accordance with the variance section. And that variance would be for things that were unique topo features or any other unique situation that would not allow them to have that 3rd access point. Previously in the ordinance, there was a waiver. The town council could grant a waiver. That was removed, and the language is added in as a variance. And additionally, anything in the subdivision code, the planning code, the zoning code, can be sought through a variance. So that is implied, but we did add this language just to clarify that that is replacing the waiver removal. Excuse me, for multifamily developments, there was no UDC requirement, and now there is proposed of 2 access points fully constructed, and that's at greater than 100 units. Another section of this general development standards that we are asking to be clarified and amended is the construction versus fee in lieu of sidewalk. So fee in lieu of sidewalk may be accepted if there is no existing sidewalk within 300 feet of the subject property. And so that means if you are doing infill development either residential, non-residential. If you do not have sidewalk within 300 feet of your property, you do not have to install the sidewalk. You would just be able to pay the fee in lieu instead. Staff did recommend approval, does recommend approval of the ordinance amendment, and Planning Board also recommended approval of the ordinance amendment that is before you tonight at your chair. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments for staff? Mr. Granis.
Bear with me, Samantha. I'll be right there.
Sir.
Under A, you've eliminated second access may consist of an existing or future street connection to an adjacent development, and I'm curious to know why that was eliminated.
So this is in conjunction with the Appendix D of the Fire Code. At this current time, the fire marshal can require as many access points as they would like to in a subdivision that deems it safe and appropriate for that subdivision, based on the layout of the subdivision, the lot sizes, the lot unit count. There's lots of different things that go into this. And a little history on this ordinance, we have met with Public Works, Engineering, Fire, Police. We've met with everybody but the paramedics and the EMS folks about this ordinance probably at least 3 or 4 times just in the past couple months. So this is something that has been reviewed by all departments, and fire is very much aware of this, and they are, all of our emergency personnel have been supportive of this ordinance amendment to create access points for subdivisions.
Is this change something that other municipalities have done? And if so, could you cite who that would be?
I cannot cite who that would be. Again, this ordinance amendment was to clarify the standards that we are already using through the TRC process, and that is already allowed by Fire Code in Appendix D.
And with respect to the state code requirements, and also more recently 160D, how does this compare to the state requirements? Is this more stringent or equal or less than?
We're working through the 160D requirements. We just went to a workshop on it last week, and I'm not sure if they covered access points, but I will have to look through that. Like I said, there's about a book this thick of changes we have to make by December of this year. So benchmarking, we did not benchmark for this. This is about life safety, and this is what we are doing right now pretty much in practice with subdivisions that come through.
Okay. You also eliminated paragraph, a waiver of these standards may be allowed by the town council during approval of a preliminary subdivision plat only where limited frontage, natural features, slope topography, or similar circumstance preclude the required connections, and there is no substantial impact noted regarding emergency service delivery. Curious to know why you eliminated the town council waiver.
The town council waiver does not allow for any sort of evidence to be presented. It is a waiver. A variance allows for evidence to be presented by the proper professional with the knowledge to be able to grant the evidence before a board, a quasi-judicial proceeding to see if it meets the findings of facts that a variance would allow. A waiver does not have any sort of evidence that has to be presented. So the variance allows for a quasi-judicial type proceeding that evidence would have to be presented. Topography or environmental features that would allow for a variance of that third access point.
And I'm assuming that the stricken requirement of the planning board or town council may waive the requirement for a driveway connection required above in those cases where unusual topography or site conditions would render such a connection or easement of no benefit to the adjoining properties is for the same reason?
Again, yes, that is a waiver, so anything that is in the ordinance that someone would like to not be able to do, they would be asked for a variance.
That's all the questions I had at this time, Mayor.
Anyone else? All right, this has been noted as a public hearing, so if there's anyone wishing to speak on this item, please step forward and state your name for the record.
Reed Smith, 114 West Main Street. On this particular item, there are a lot of consequences that go around with a decision like this. I think this is coming together a little fast, and we've not been able to socialize it enough to, make this big of a decision tonight. The development community has a lot of concerns, but agrees with the spirit of what is going on here, which is to protect public safety, which should be at everybody's forefront. But we see some of this regulation is unnecessary and can be handled during the subdivision process. As Samantha stated, the fire chief can shut a subdivision down with accesses at will. But by putting this in place, puts some subdivisions dead on arrival, i.e. a Parkview could not have been built. So we would like for there to be some more time to discuss this and for there to be some serious thought given, especially on items such as greater than 250 lots on the third constructed access. We do not believe that is consistent with building code or fire code. Currently, that third access has to be stubbed, and we feel like that is an burdensome requirement. Also, I'm very interested, as Councilman Granish just said, on some benchmarking. When we went around on rec fees, it was very helpful to see what Zebulons were, what Windells were, and saw, it's hard to argue with that because we were a little behind on what we were paying in rec fees. Here, it's hard to know where we're benchmarked in other municipalities and what they're requiring on entrances. I think that would be a helpful piece of information for us to see. We're also about to do a code rewrite. Not sure why that can't be considered in the code rewrite as part of that process, so we can take more of a holistic and comprehensive approach to it while we're rushing this one through. So that's kind of my feedback, and hope that the council will take time to deliberate this and make a good decision here, because it has a lot of consequences and would stop a lot of projects or potential projects. And that would be consistent with what we've had that we wouldn't have today. That tax base that y'all just went over in your financials wouldn't be here if this policy was in place. A lot of subdivisions wouldn't be here if we had to adhere to this policy here. So I just would encourage the council to deliberate it. I'm not sure if y'all have talked to anyone in the development community, but just to make sure we understand what consequences there would be, what subdivisions could and could not be, and how we're going to manage that process.
To your knowledge, has anyone in the development community done their own homework to find out how this works in other towns? Or are y'all just waiting for the town to?
No, for sure. But I'm not sure.
So are you experiencing great, differences? Are you seeing the same?
Yes, there are differences. And again,
I'm sure there are differences, but are there great differences?
I believe so. I'm not prepared to present those tonight.
Okay, just asking because wanted to know. Cool.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak? All right, if not, I'll close the public hearing and turn it over to the council.
May I jump up real quick, Mayor, to speak on this, or it's too late? Okay, thank you.
But don't let that happen again, because there's plenty of pause there. Is anyone else wish to speak?
Just getting old. My reaction
I
is
just
a little
turned
slow.
54, so I can relate.
John Salupo, 117 Hanson. With all due respect to the gentleman just prior, expediting or taking a step back on some of our decisions to move forward, I think is a stance we should take. When I had just recently gone through all the proposals that have been done, we're by 2023 expecting almost 5,200 brand-new homes to be built, over 1,000 townhouses, and 750 apartments. So with the police chief here and our services needed, I do believe that we need proper ability to get to the amount of projects that are going on. Maybe not as they're being built, but it seems that phases continue to get expansions, to we grant new proposals for new phases. So to allow us to have these access points, yes, it might cost the contractors more money to stub some of these access points for the future. They're going to happen, and we should keep them. And I would propose that we look to the future. We look to the future because there's a lot coming on, and to keep this town in the spirit of what it is turning into, which is a desirable place to do business and to live, to take away safety just for money, I'm totally against that. I'm all for development. I'm all for advancement. I'm all for growth. But there's other issues that I have brought up in the past that we need to address. But at this particular point in time, these like that young lady had spoken about before, these access points, ingresses and egresses, we should not take lightly, because you give a foot, they take a yard, they always want more, and we give them to them because we have the ability for the growth that's coming down the pike. So let's give ourselves the aptitude to keep these points in. They're going to be used. It may cost a little bit up front now, but they will be grateful that we allowed them. We stuck to our grounds and kept them there. Thank you.
Agree. Anyone else?
I'll get up fast next time.
Chief?
Good evening, Mayor, members of council, Lee Barbie, Fire Chief. I'll go back in history just a little bit. The early 90s, we had a LP tanker that come unhooked from a truck on the east side of 70 on a Friday afternoon, Friday morning, 11 o'clock. This was before the Front Street extension. If any of you remember, 42 had been changed from coming by Coastal Chemical to where it is now. So when that incident happened, we responded. We closed the east side of town down for 8 hours. There was a bank on that end of town, food line. That was a new shopping center during that time. It made Clayton heavily congested for people trying to get around during the lunchtime. All the construction people like myself that was in business then, trying to get to the banks, but I had to deal with it. After that incident, I wrote a letter for the town to DOT about extending Front Street. Front Street is extended now with the help of planning department, economic development, whatever. We got Front Street extended. So that's kind of a same example we're talking about, access. Ellington Subdivision used to be Cricket Hollow. We had a gas leak there years ago. People had to walk in and out for several hours because we couldn't let them drive through. Now you have the access points on the backside that get you out to Amelia Church Road. Champion Street, some years back, same situation. Late one night, we had a gas incident. People parked at Everest Chapel Church, had to walk around through the subdivision where the bird streets are, go around by the pool to get into Cobblestone, Aversboro Road, back in there. A lot of people was upset that night. That's still one way in, one way out now. Very congested. Brook Hill, which is right outside of town, we had an MVA there a number of years ago. We blocked the road for almost an hour. People couldn't get in and out. The only way to was walk because we had the road blocked. A lot of these are incidents that we've had. I don't know the lady that spoke tonight about Rolling Wood. We have a lot of old subdivisions that are one way in, one way out. For the last 5 years, the fire department has had this discussion. We've had this discussion many times with fire marshal and now the fire inspector. I don't deal with the code. They do. They work with Samantha. They work with Rich. So there has been a lot of discussions about this over the years. I've had a lot of discussions. I've had a lot of phone calls from contractors. No, there's other areas in the county that are not doing this. And I had a discussion last week with the fire marshal's office about neighboring districts that the county's approved one way in, one way out. You know, they did it with a private access to get to a lift station. That's supposed to be emergency access for us. That's not suitable. That's not what we look at. We need access to get heavy trucks in and to get out. But it's not only that. We need to be able to get people out or in if they need to evacuate the neighborhoods. It's not just by blocking the road. The other part about this, and we've had, like Samantha said, we've had meetings with developers and discussed it. When we go in a subdivision for a structure fire, whether it's a 1,000-foot house or a 3,500-foot house, we have to have access to get in, but we have to have other fire apparatus to get in there if we need water, if the hydrant system don't support it. So we've got to get trucks in and out, and we've got to deal with traffic. We have to rely on law enforcement to help us deal with the traffic. This is a big issue for the fire service and emergency services. I feel like that I use a lot of common sense approach, and I've had this discussion. I've made my living for many years working in the construction business, so I'm not opposed to developers and contractors. But they need to understand that we're running more and more calls, we have more and more traffic on the road, and we have to deal with that situation. We adjust to overcome our problems, but we're trying to remedy some of these problems too. We didn't have the teamwork and support in the town of Clayton years ago. I'm just being honest about it. We have the teamwork and support now where we all sit down at the meetings and we talk about these things and how important it is to each of us. And I'm willing to compromise some things, but we need these access points. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just would like to point out, under these current regulations, the lady from Rollingwood and the gentleman from Riverwood would not have a house. Those subdivisions would not have been approved in this regulation. Other subdivisions, Riverwood, Glen Laurel, Lionsgate, Ellington, Parkview, Timberlake, Castadale, Summerlin, Chandler's Ridge, Cobblestone, East Village, would not have been approved in these regulations. So I'm with Chief. We got to have health safety, but we also got to have places for people to live. And none of these places would have been available for people to live in this current condition. Our main objection, you didn't hear me talk about the 2 points of access. Clearly, if that's the way the town wants to go, it's hard to argue with that a place should have 2 points of access in case there's a catastrophic event in one area to get people out of another area. It's hard to argue that. If that's the level of concern and security that the council wishes to have, it's hard to argue that. Our main point is with the third point of access, which I spoke with earlier, because that covers 2 points of catastrophic events, and we feel is a little cumbersome, which would, if you address that, some of the names of the communities I just read, then go back on the list that could have been done versus none of them.
Yeah, I understand your point, but I just also think, too, it's not exactly apples and oranges. I think it is apples and oranges. I don't think it's apples and apples. Because, what I'm interpreting is that, no, Rolling Wood would not have been developed under these, but that was developed in 1965. So I was born in 66. So I don't know, and my point in saying that is, I don't think even back then, anybody knew what it would need to go. So I think we're trying to prepare for the future and being able to both be a friendly and quality place to develop, in addition to make sure we've got those safety standards in place that they didn't even think about in 1965.
I guess you
or in 1990, or in 1996.
You're just about to stop the show, because I mean, pretty much all quality development in Clayton would not have been able to exist and will not be able to exist moving forward with these regulations.
I just beg to differ on the will not be able to exist.
I mean, Jody, I do this.
It might mean that there are one or two that don't want to go this route, but it doesn't mean that the entire development people in the United States aren't interested in,
Jody, I do this for a living, and I've passed on projects with this because, as staff said, they're already implementing it really without it even being passed. And so I know the projects that it's already stopped and the projects that it will stop. There are a few that will come through, and we're working with staff on some projects that will. So it's not going to completely stop it, but this is going to significantly impact the development community and Clayton's ability to provide rooftops for the town.
And I would say to you, there are people out there who would be happy to hear that.
So,
anyone else?
Sorry, seems like it's a tennis match. But to the gentleman's point and understanding that he is a developer, I totally respect that.
Sure.
But also the advantageous, or what's advantageous to you, is the fact that on the back end of Rollingwood Subdivision, there is a neighborhood that you can see through the clearing of the trees. And I think that that's an opportunity. Now, maybe you could say I am speaking from a standpoint of ignorance because I am not a developer. I'm not a developer. But in terms of what I see, in terms of my common senses, is why don't you have another access point on the back end of Rollingwood Subdivision, especially since we are getting to a point where, sidewalks are being installed, and people should be able to walk to another community, but in regards to the safety issue of being able to get in and get out, it's very important. And someone has to be the troubadour, so it might as well be you. And if you're a troubadour and you say that if you look at something that's antiquated, and yes, this plat was created in 1965, so there was only one point of entry and egress, you have to do better now. That's no longer the standard. It's no longer a standard. Thank you.
All right, anyone else? All right, no one else wishing to speak. I'll close the public hearing and turn it over to council for comments. Mr. Holder?
I want to make a motion. I move we table this until after the retreat, and this is one item we discussed at the retreat.
I second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to table this item until after our February retreat. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Lindsay?
I just wanted to offer, there were several different elements of the ordinance changes. If the issues that you want to retreat or want to table have to do with the access points only, you could adopt the other ordinance changes and leave those for further debate if there wasn't disagreement on the sidewalk fee and lieu stuff, for example.
I'm thinking, based on the information I've heard from council, is that they're looking at the holistic view of this and not one specific thing. Yeah. All right, any other questions? All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. All right, up next under old business is the wastewater allocation policy.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Rich Capola, Director of Public Services. In front of you, you have a revision to what was previously briefed in January, in December. The first portion, based on some comments that we received from the development community and other internal discussions with staff, we've made a few adjustments to the previous version, mainly clarifications within the policy as to what the intent is, as well as what is obviously the town council's discretion to be able to make some adjustments to the policy, particularly with regards to what the breakdown in percentages of capacity allocation to non-residential versus residential development could be. We've put some clarifications, or I should say examples of what some of those items for the bonus points within the rubric may be classified as. In addition, on the actual rubric or the score sheet, if you will, we've made several clarifications there as well with regards to how the score sheet, I'm going to use that, would be utilized. Essentially, the score sheet's broken up into kind of 4 different areas. The top 2, which is shown on the screen, would be the green block. Each development would fall into one category within there. Within that top block, so points from that category, or excuse me, points from that top block would only be counted from the one category it falls into. Additionally, in the blue category as well, that would be the intent would be that one category would be received there. And then when you get into the bonus points or the deduction points, as many as the developer would be, would qualify for, could be utilized for them to sum up to that, hopefully, the minimum of 50 points required for the allocation. One thing we did note came up recently with regard to some of the deduction points. There are certain infrastructure improvements related to pump stations that may actually be a benefit to the town. So there is an allowance in here for the town engineer to utilize his discretion, his or her discretion, I should say, as to whether or not some of the infrastructure requirements are actually either consistent with the current adopted plan or moving us in a direction of our future collection system, so that the development would not be negatively impacted for something that is actually to the benefit of the town infrastructure-wise. With that, I'll leave it up to you all for any additional questions.
Questions or comments for staff? Mr. Granis.
So I have a couple of questions. Under your institutional, I'm sure that takes into account schools.
That's correct.
Churches. What about 501c3s? Would that be included in institutionals? An example would be Rotary or Civitan or Optimists. Would that fall into that category?
I believe that would defer to the land use category that would fall into. I'd have to defer to our planning director as to whether that would be considered institutional. I believe it would, but.
Well, the reason I bring that up is you give positive points, 15 to be exact, in your green section, but because all of those entities are tax exempt, they get no points in your blue section. And I'm curious to know what the rationale is about scoring that way.
Well, well, first and foremost, I probably should note it again that the intent of this policy is to hopefully bridge the gap here between when we have the new the new wastewater treatment plant online and have additional capacity, and we don't have to be as restrictive or selective, I guess, with the amount of capacity we have. The intent there, I believe, was if you're left with a certain amount of capacity that you can allocate, would be the discretion of the council to determine whether they were looking to allocate it towards the types of uses that would be generating revenue or tax generation, or would it be somebody would be utilizing the capacity on non-ad valorem tax revenue generating types of entities.
I think that's probably all the other questions all the questions that I would have at this point, because as maybe the council doesn't know, but I met with Mr. Coppola last week, and we went over this in quite some detail, and I want to thank you for that, because it was very informative. But I do have a concern, which I did share with you. Given that this is a policy, I want to be sure that we've really looked at this and evaluated it. I feel relatively confident that you and your staff have, but I am not at all confident that this council, myself included, have really done our homework to ascertain as to whether or not, yes, we're ready to go or we're not ready to go. And because of that, I would like to table this and also discuss this at our retreat. And I'm going to make that in the form of a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to table the wastewater allocation policy until after our retreat. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Adam?
Just for clarification, I would expect council might be indicating you expect to discuss these at the retreat. So when we say after the retreat, I think we will also discuss them at the retreat. Is that fair to
Yes.
say? Okay.
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. All right, up next under new business is the Code of Ordinance Amendment, Chapter 53, backflow.
I'm going to stand up just briefly to introduce Brandon Carroll, our utility compliance technician, technically. This is Brandon's world. He's going to go ahead and enlighten you on everything Chapter 53.
All right.
Council and Mayor. Maybe back to the other side. Okay. I'll go. So basically, we're here today to talk about Chapter 53, the backflow and cross-connection ordinance. The ordinance was originally adopted in 1995, so it is quite old, and as we all know, things have changed quite drastically in the water and sewer world since 1995. But I want to start by talking about our partnership that we started January 1st of last year with BSI Online. They are our new backflow database management software that we use. They provide 24-hour day customer service to us and any resident who's in need of the question of backflow device, location, whatever that may be. In the past year, we've added over 100 new devices that we were not aware that we had, or they needed to be installed just over time. They got missed or whatever the case may be, but we have since brought those devices into compliance. This year's, the testing compliance rate was at 98.62%. And since we've been sitting in this meeting, I've received a couple of new tests, and now we're over 99% compliant for the whole year. That's less than 20 devices out of 2,000 for the entire year. Also, since we started this program, I've been in connection with Raleigh and Durham. They're two larger cities, but they also provide great knowledge when it comes to backflow and cross-connection advice. So we actually beat them to the punch of joining BSI. We joined in January, Raleigh joined in around August, and then Durham's going to start very soon if they haven't already started. So like I said, the ordinance was adopted in 1995. It is quite old and outdated. There are some things that we have changed in the new ordinance that are very similar to the old, but they just add clarification to what we're trying to achieve. So like I said, it is time for an update, so we are ready to do that. Just to kind of highlight the things that are not changing in the ordinance is definitions. There's lots of definitions that go into what is a backflow device, what's a facility, whatever that you have a question about as far as the device or location, hazard, or anything like that. The definitions remain the same. Responsibilities also remain the same. The town is a purchased water system, so we have to provide safety to our water customers as well as protect the Johnson County with their system, and we do not want to have any contamination issues related to backflow. We also have allowed the time frame and the correction of violation to stay the same from our current ordinance. We, like I said, we're at 99% compliance. I don't see any need at this point to change any of that because what we have is working. The enforcement also is staying the same. It has worked as well. We've not had any issues with people being out of compliance, so we haven't had to use the enforcement policy as much as it is there to use it for. Here are some differences between the current ordinance and the new ordinance, and I don't really consider them differences as much as clarifications. The existing conditions part of the ordinance is currently in our current ordinance, but it's not spelled out as specifically as it is today. Existing conditions would be something that we go into a facility where they have a water hose connected to a sink in a mop bucket in a restaurant or something that we could easily ask them to correct or change to prevent a backflow situation. As easy as that is, there are some other plumbing issues where things are connected improperly, and we do give them a chance to make those corrections before we go into enforcement action. Severe hazards is probably the biggest difference that we've changed. Our current ordinance states that both potential severe and moderate hazards, but that's all it states. So in this new severe hazards, it basically states what a severe hazard is and lists multiple instances of severe hazards that would require different protection in the ordinance. Also, we have the residential and moderate hazards. Residential is not really stated at all in our current ordinance. Residential is a meter serving 2 or less units. And moderate hazards will be anything that are not severe hazards, but would be an office building or something like that where there is still potential for something to happen by accident. The notification of hazard is also something that we've added to the new ordinance. It basically lists out how we should notify the customer of any deficiencies they have in their policy or their protections as we speak. So it's basically just certified mail, hand delivery, whatever means necessary to get them the notification that we're assured that they get what we need them to see. And then also we have a change in nature of use added to this ordinance. This basically started in our TRC process and pre-app and different things. So when a business changes hands, it may have a backflow device or it may not. So if something's new coming into the town, which we receive lots of new applicants daily for businesses to come to town, we need to make sure that we know what they're putting in those buildings so we can protect the water accordingly.
Are there instances where people would not have to do this?
Residential customers only.
Okay, but for new business coming into town?
They will have to install or add, yes, sir. And then in addition to the new ordinance, we've also adopted a day-to-day operations manual that basically specifies in great detail the differences between the facilities with the irrigation facility, a commercial facility, or occupants that have fire protection. And also in that catalog, it more clearly distributes what is a severe hazard versus a moderate hazard. We also have in there a way to monitor our testers, the people who actually do the work that we do not see. We have a way to, with BSI also, to make sure their testing certifications are up to date and their testing equipment is up to date. If either of those are off, they're not allowed to input a test into our BSI system. And then the enforcement actions taken against testing companies, we do have a part in the new handbook that states that we can suspend a tester or a testing company if we find deficiencies in reports or anything that they did in neglect. And that's all I have. Any questions?
Questions or comments? Bobby?
Brandon, when you talk about testers, they're certified by the state, correct?
They are not certified by the state per se. They go to a testing school that is provided. Well, yeah, actually, I'll tell you that. They have to go to a certification school that is not provided by the state. They get their qualifications. They must do a hands-on operational test and pass a written test. The written test is done by the state. The hands-on test is done by the testing school, whether it's North Carolina Rural Water or the AWWA or whoever that may be. And in places like Raleigh and Durham, where they have 40,000 devices, where we have 2,000, they actually have a team set up in their facility that they do a testing school. So if you're in Raleigh, you have to be a Raleigh certified tester to provide, to test their devices.
So their equipment, do they have to do a refresher, what I'm trying to get?
Yes.
Because, I mean, 10 years, the guy could be so far out of date.
Backflow testing certification for the tester is every 2 years they must retake the test.
Cool.
The backflow test kit that they use to test devices must be inspected annually.
Good. Thank you.
And I think it's pretty stringent too. I mean, I think if you do like just about anything wrong, you could lose your certification to be able to test those.
That is correct.
It's pretty strict.
And it is something separate from a plumbing license, so most companies have they're licensed plumbers and they're also licensed to test backflow. If you're not a licensed backflow tester and you are a licensed plumber, that does not necessarily give you the right to test a backflow device.
Gotcha. Mr. Granis?
First of all, this is great. I think it's been a long time in coming, but I'm glad it's here. One of the questions that I have is that, does this meet or possibly exceed the North Carolina Department of Environment or Health or Natural Resources or Division of Environmental Health, Public Water Supply organizations in the state?
I can't speak directly to how far it goes to overseeing what they do. I got a lot of this information from a partnership that we've trying to work out with Raleigh, who's has a lot more public pull than we do when it comes to the state level. But with them, basically, they have something very similar to this adopted for the city of Raleigh. So we just kind of work together to get what works for us out of their ordinance and also just kept what works for us into ours. So we have a broad spectrum of, we know it works here, and together we hope to get better compliance even further than what we have.
And what do the likes of, say, Wake Forest, Holly Springs, Apex have with respect to a backflow ordinance?
I'm not sure.
Are we similar, or actually have you benchmarked any, or is this unique?
This is like very similar to Raleigh, which I know they're a lot larger than us. Raleigh has, you could break Raleigh down into 7 other little mini small towns. Wake Forest, I don't think it's one of them, but Rolesville, Garner, Zebulon, Wendell, they all are little small towns like we are, and they use the same ordinance because the city of Raleigh runs their water system. In my opinion, our ordinance goes further than Holly Springs does in far as what they have to enforce. I've talked with the lady at Holly Springs, and their enforcement is hardly anything at all. They do use BSI, so they do have a good tracking system, but I think we're ahead of where Holly Springs is currently.
So would it be fair to say that with respect to other communities of our size, that we're essentially incorporating the same ordinance or extremely similar ordinance as they have today, not something that is far superior or far inferior?
Yes, I would say we fit somewhere right in the middle. Raleigh has more stringent rules than some, but they're not as stringent as Durham. Durham, they have plumbing inspectors on staff, so Durham can actually go above and beyond what Raleigh can do because Raleigh doesn't have the plumbing inspectors to go into as part of their backflow program. So we obviously are understaffed in size compared to Raleigh and Durham, but we fit right along, I think, with everybody else, Cary and Southern Pines, which is a similar size town that we do.
Okay, that's all I had, Mayor.
All right. Anyone else? Brandon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, what are the wishes of the council? Mr. Thomas.
I'll make a motion that we adopt ordinance 2020-01-06.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for adoption of the ordinance. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. 5 minutes. We're going to take a break for 5 minutes. I'm going to call our meeting back to order, and the next item on the agenda is the EDA grant resolution.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. Rich Capola, Public Services Director. This is more of an informational item, but we do want to ask for your support. The Economic Development Administration published a program for some grant funding that the town is eligible for regarding some resiliency funds, mainly based on the damage that the hurricanes have done over the past several years, and really looking at opportunities for infrastructure improvements that would hopefully mitigate any issues in the future for local communities like ours. In reviewing it, the county was also interested in pursuing these funds, and we've come together with a combined project that would basically do a significant improvement to our transmission lines, essentially constructing a force main from the East Clayton industrial area all the way to our future wastewater treatment plant site. In addition, the county would be looking to do basically doing a parallel force main along Highway 70 heading towards Smithfield to be able to accept additional flow into their system. That would basically put us where the East Clayton industrial area, at least, if there was an issue at any of our plants, we would have the opportunity, at least in the shorter term, to send flow to Johnston County, back to our Little Creek facility, or to the river property, which hopefully we'll have a new treatment plant on in the near future, but also in the interim would give us the option to send some flow to Raleigh in an emergency situation. So tonight we're asking for your support to allow us to submit for the grant, to have the manager sign the necessary forms committing the town to basically a 20% match on our portion of the funds. It is a time-limited submittal. It's a rolling submittal with a limited amount of funds, I should say. So we're hoping to get that submittal in by the end of the month. Any questions?
Questions or comments? Mr. Granis.
Mr. Capola, what happens if we don't get this grant?
So the infrastructure improvements on our end were already planned as part of our overall wastewater treatment plant project. We would essentially have to utilize the funding that we're chasing for those projects, which is mostly state revolving fund, financing. This, obviously, if we were able to win this grant, would offset a significant portion, or I consider a significant portion, several $1 million worth of infrastructure improvements. It would also allow us to get this moving forward sooner. So we would have that resiliency in place much sooner than our plant, as well as give us the opportunity to work with our partners.
And do you know about what percentage of this funding the county would get versus what we would get?
We've discussed getting a proportional share. So our project overall is approximately, I'm going to use round numbers here, about an $8 million project, or $9 million project. Their project is approximately $1.5 to $2 million project. So so we've asked for pretty much what we think is the maximum amount that the grant, the EDA could potentially award us. They can choose to award to that level. They could choose to award a certain portion. So we've agreed that proportionally our project to theirs would be the percentage. The exact percentage I don't have off the top of my head, but I believe it's 20 to 25% split, 70-30, however you want to look at it.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thank you, Rich. And I'll turn it over to council for their deliberation.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we approve the adoption of Resolution 2020-03.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt the resolution. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Up next is staff reports, beginning with the town manager, town attorney, town clerk.
No reports, thank you.
All right, from other staff, we'll get a digital meter update.
Good evening, everyone, council and mayor. I was asked to bring more information about our advanced metering project, or our digital metering project. What I've included in your staff report is a copy of the original timeline. I believe you should have that. I gave that to Kimberly. You should have that, and that really specifically goes through from the time we actually chose our vendors for the project, which are Ferguson and Census, and starting kind of through our what we are now dealing with, and then showing you completion. So if you have that one form in front of you, we actually started and had our kickoff meeting in August of 19. to prep kind of my department, electric department, water department. This is a huge project, and this is encompassing more than just new meters and billing customers. This is really affecting so many departments in the town. Thank you, Stacy. What has been happening again since August through approximately mid-November was the installation of all of the network equipment, the reading equipment on the towers. Again, we have the 4 points of collection, which are going to be our 2 water towers, and over at the Operations Center, there's also equipment installed, and we put up a pole in Riverwood to collect. It's on the Food Lion side of the property, but there is a pole out there with the reading equipment on it. We are starting in the testing phase of this process. We are installing this week the meters that will be on all of the town facilities. So we are going to read and test ourselves first before we deploy meters in the field. Now, we'll say this, since May of this year, any new construction has had the new water meters installed, the new type water meters. Now, they're not active where I can press a button at my desk and we receive the readings. We're having to manually go out and lift the lid and read those meters. It's about 400 in the field right now. So once again, when we get through the testing phase and we make sure we can test and bill ourselves properly, we'll activate those meters and then begin reading those through the network, through the towers and through the system. The project will be in full deployment, meaning changing out electric and water meters, and there will be crews in town. Stacy has been working very diligently on what our communications pieces will be to customers to say, hey, we're coming in your neighborhood over this period of time to change out your meters. We've actually even established a phone number here at the town that will be published for anyone who has questions to call and to say, there are going to be 3 of us that are manning that particular line. It's going to ring at a couple of desks, and we will answer questions. Now, that doesn't mean staff is not going to have answers also. We feel very strongly that if anyone at the front desk got a phone call, they would know how to answer it. If they do not feel comfortable answering it, they send it to one of us that is going to have more in-depth knowledge of the project and kind of timelines and where we are at. Projects should end in mid-2021. Again, this is a very large project. We're changing out 16,000 meters total. We, again, have only changed out or installed the new meters in new construction areas of the town. We have a shipment of electric and water meters now. It was just electric water meters when I reported to you in December. We now have a shipment of electric meters that are on site and ready to be deployed again as we move through the project. We've really had no troubles thus far with a project this size. Haven't seen anything that has caused us any pause to say, okay, wait a minute, we need to back up and rethink this. Again, we are just at the point to start deployment, which again, we'll start testing. And I can assure you, we are not going to start billing our residents until we feel 100% confident in how we are collecting those reads and billing ourselves, the town accounts. I was asked about, how we Stacy, myself, Byron, Terry in my office, Tommy Roy, several of us have been communicating with other towns around us that have had similar projects, some smaller than us and some much larger than us. We visited Newton, North Carolina. They are a New World customer, a Tyler New World customer. So we were really interested from my perspective on how this all integrated for ease of billing. So I spent a lot of my time learning that day. With Fayetteville PwC, a much larger, with huge customer base compared to us, we've definitely, through all of this, learned some lessons, some takeaways for us. everyone has been very encouraging that we have a third party, MeterSys, kind of administrating this, leading this project for us, kind of directing us in the right way. They've said several took it on themselves to do it, but you have to dedicate a lot of staff for kind of the ins and outs of this project. I've also learned that based on the amount of data that we're going to have access to, and this is not just, was your meter read? I mean, this is not just I used 1,000 gallons of water in X amount of time. This is a lot of data that's going to be helpful for electric department, water department. We've learned that this is just a lot of data, and again, you almost need a data analyst, someone to manage the data itself. And that's definitely something that we all are talking through right now as we move into budgets. Stacy and I got really good recommendations about communications. How should we communicate what worked and what didn't work for other municipalities? We have also gotten informational policies, how we need to update and change policies. And then we are going to pay a visit to Fayetteville PWC in mid-February. We're working through the dates right now, again, to go down and say, what did you learn? Please continue to share information. We don't want to recreate the wheel. I would like to make this as seamless as possible, not only for those of us who are in it every day, but also for staff. And I want to be able to share with them anything we can to make this a very seamless project for us and our customers. We are definitely on target to, as of today, to spend the $5 million, which was allocated for the project. And from my opinion, from the person who's kind of handling my side of it, the billing and utility side of it, the project is definitely on schedule and progressing very well. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments? Mr. Granis?
Have you worked with anybody at Electric Cities at all with respect to acting as a partner to provide input on maybe problems or solutions that other communities have had?
I have not, Ms. Granis.
Okay.
They have been very helpful, I've found, in helping us benchmark what other communities have done. They sent me door hangers that other communities used. So on the communication side, and they have a sort of task force, and I have a key contact there, and they've been really responsive, and I've appreciated their help and guidance.
I'd like to get with you to find out who that is. Okay. It might be somebody that I'm talking to as well, or I might be able to provide you an additional name.
Okay, sounds good.
So, okay. So you said that we dedicated or projected $5 million for the cost of this, and we're on line for that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. With respect to that, when we achieve the payback, if you will, when would you expect that, if at all, there would be a reduction of the $2 meter fees on the bills that we're currently seeing?
I believe that was a 15-year loan payback period. So, certainly at the end of that 15 years, or when that money is paid off, I'm assuming that would be your decision to change at any time. Absolutely.
Okay. And when you incorporate the software to be able to read and the meters, et cetera, and be able to extrapolate information, is that going to be a standalone software, or is it going to be tied into VC3 or what?
It is a standalone. It's called Census Analytics. My mind just went blank. Census Analytics. And every night there will be a push of information from Tyler New World into Census Analytics. And then we can ask Census Analytics to dump us data. So, for example, I know there's a wonderful report that we're going to be able to run that tells us if vacant properties, if meters have been tampered with. Not that anyone would ever do that, but has someone done something to that electric meter? Have they touched it, pulled it, done anything to it? That's the kind of information that I see dumped to my group every day. There are different reports that Dale would need for electric, or Rich might need for water. There's just an array of information we're going to be able to get. But the two systems will talk. They will talk to each other. It's much above my brain level, but they will be able to communicate without us telling them to.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but New World is our
Billing utilities.
IT platform that is, I'm thinking, run by VC3, is that right? That's it, okay.
No. Okay, you do this.
New World Systems is our accounting software. It's our community development permitting software. It's our HR software. It basically does all the operations of the town. It has nothing whatsoever to do with VC3, except it runs on the servers that they manage. It's a package that we purchased back in 2008, and it has served us very well.
Okay. I think that's it, Mayor.
All right. Any other questions? Ann, thank you so much for the update. All right, moving on to other business. I'll now open the floor for informal discussion and public comment. Anyone wish to speak? Wishing to speak, I'll turn it over to council for comments. No comments?
I do have one.
Mr. Granis.
I attended an Electricity's rate meeting last week, and the good news is that the projections that Electricity's was looking at for 2020 appear to be somewhat overstated, which ultimately is a good thing for us because the actual rates appear to be, what I'm going to say is right on key with where we projected we would be. That's a little unusual. Usually there's a bit of a shortfall. So the good news is because we're on schedule with respect to the projections. We feel that it's going to allow us, meaning the town, to be able to look at various rates at budget time and more easily be able to make decisions on what we do with respect to our electric system. So all in all, that was really some great news. So I'll keep you guys informed.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? All right, if not, I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session.
So moved.
Second.
In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Our closed session is ended, and now I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move with adjourn.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Good night.